This is David Prosper, host of The Leadership Revolution. Thanks for listening to the following broadcast from Public House Media.
Hello. Welcome and thank you for joining the Confessions of a Military Spouse podcast. I said big things and changes were happening in 2021 and I am so excited for them. With that being said, we are your hosts, Jenna and Candace Gamez. Jenna is a military spouse of 10 years, a mom, a registered and certified dental assistant, and a certified phlebotomist. Candace is an active duty military member of 17 years, a military spouse of 13 years, a mom, and a student. Again, we just want to say thank you for being here with us today, and we hope you enjoy the changes. As always, we highly encourage you to share our podcast, and we definitely appreciate any and all feedback. So if you would like to leave us some feedback, please feel free to email us at confessionsofamilspouse@gmail.com, or you can find us on Facebook and Instagram at Confessions of a Mill Spouse or at publichousemedia.org. So, as you can tell, I have a co-host now for my podcast, and I am so excited. So without further ado, I would like to introduce you guys to Candace Gamez.
Hi.
Thank you so much for co-hosting with me. I am so excited, and I just want to give our listeners a little bit of an introduction as to why I'm so excited to have you and your experience both in the military and as a military spouse.
Yeah, I'm super excited to kind of join in here and, get in on this conversation. I think there's definitely some things I probably know about that most spouses don't. And so this will be kind of fun to go through and see where we are and what questions people have and what topics we can kind of touch on from multiple points of view, because I have that active duty service kind of behind me, and I work in some areas that a lot of families deal with, especially with deployments and exercises. So I think there's just some good topics we're going to be able to come up with here, and really discuss and maybe just give people information that they're kind of looking for, or maybe information they didn't know they wanted, but we can give them.
Yes, I could not agree more. Candace and I had a discussion before we ever started recording, and I got carried away. So a little bit about how Candace and I met. We actually met through our husbands, who I think they were stationed together, right?
Yeah. So they've known each other longer than we've known each other, obviously, because they weren't both married right off the bat when they joined the military. But yeah, so they've known each other longer, and actually, I think I've known Dustin longer than I've known you.
Yes, I think that's correct. And I think I've actually known Chris longer than I've known you, because when I first met him, I think you were on deployment.
Yeah, actually, I think that's true. And when when they were like, "Oh, Bert got married," I was like, "What?" I had no idea. I mean, to be fair, like you said, I was on deployment, and so, that's one of kind of the downfalls for me, is there's not this huge community for me to connect to, right? Which maybe this will kind of help close that gap just a little bit, but I don't have that community per se, if that kind of makes sense, right? There's a military spouse community, and there's a kind of assumption that you're a non-active duty member, right? You're a civilian, right? And
Yes.
so I don't, there are a lot of dual active duty spouses, but people don't often refer to us as the spouse, right? Because we're active duty. So I miss out on a lot of those kinds of things, even knowing that Bert was dating someone, but that's just simply because a lot of times, my schedule doesn't allow for, let's go hang out, you know what I mean? Or like if he's hanging out with everybody, then I have to work or something crazy like that. So, you know, I I was definitely surprised. They were like, "Oh, you got married." I'm like, "Oh, okay."
Oh, great. Okay, well, here we are. Well, and then I think after you got back from deployment, Chris deployed shortly after that, right?
So yeah, interesting. I
Or
mean, we have a
he
lot
had
of
gone like right before you. I remember it being something
yes,
crazy in my mind. Like, I could not wrap my mind around the fact that
yes.
you guys would like only be together for like a few months.
Yeah, so we, a little bit of just my background. So, and like, our situation here. So, we met as active duty. We were both active duty before we met. He was actually roommates with a really good friend of mine from high school, like one of my best friends from high school. We were both Marines. He's since got out, but my husband and him were roommates. And so, um, that's how we met when I got back from my first duty station in Okinawa. Uh, and I kind of forgot where I was going with that, but yeah, our first year of marriage, we spent almost 10 of those 12 months separated because we got married right before I deployed. So we got married in September. I got deployed in November, and then he deployed at the beginning of the next year before I even got home. And so our deployments overlapped with one another. And then we did his whole deployment. I was on a ship for my deployment, so I was out with a MEU. And so, of course, if anybody is familiar with that, I think you are. I
Yes.
think you are, right? Yeah. So I'm never in a place for a certain amount of time, right? We're always all over the place. Um, so I was all over essentially the Middle East and stuff like that. We were in Kuwait, and he actually flew to Kuwait 2 days after we left there.
Oh my
Um,
gosh. See, I didn't know that.
Yeah, to get back on ship. And so we missed each other by a couple of days, and then I got home probably a month and a half, maybe 2 after that. It's been a long time, okay? It's been 13 years, so I don't
It has.
remember,
It has.
but I just remember the sequence of events. So we just missed each other in Kuwait. He went into Iraq. I went home, um, kind of reset, our house and all that stuff because he packed everything up. No one was going to be living there for a little while, so he packed it all up, put it in storage, and so then I got home and unpacked everything, and then he got home 2 days before our 1 year anniversary.
Oh
So
my gosh.
yeah,
What a whirlwind of a first year.
I mean, before that, to be honest, I think just being active duty, you just assume the active duty member is going to deploy, and so I think we were just kind of always prepared for that. But before we were married, when we were dating, we dated for about 2 years, which, to be honest, for two Marines to date for that long and not be married is pretty big
Right?
accomplishment, to be
That's
honest.
like that's a record.
Yeah, when I tell people that, they're like, "What? 2 years?" I'm like, "Yeah, we
Yeah.
yeah, we dated for almost 2 years, and we probably went in those 2 years. We went through at least two deployments for him. Um, he deployed twice. I was with a unit that didn't deploy at my level, so our subordinate units deployed, but I did not. And I was in kind of a weird MOS at the time, a weird occupational specialty where I really wasn't deployable per se at the unit I was at. Kind of a weird situation, but so he had a couple deployments in there while we were dating, and then we got married right before I went on my first deployment, which overlapped with one of his. And then since then, we've both had one deployment each. Uh, with, I mean, you count how many exercises, I couldn't even begin to tell you. How much field time? Yeah, I don't even know. And then, we just did 3 years in Okinawa. So that was, an adventure and counts as some of our overseas time. And then I can't even tell you how many exercises or trips he and I took while we were out there for that. And then now we're here in Lejeune, actually.
Yes, and
So
what's kind of, I guess, a little funny and ironic about everything is that I feel like we've kind of been following you as to like where we go duty station wise, because
yeah,
from San Diego, we went on recruiting duty, but he went as a DI, correct?
yeah, he was on the drill field.
Yep. And then was that when you guys went to Okinawa after that?
Yeah, so he was on the drill field, and then about, 6 months after, he got off the drill field, he was with a squadron down on, Miramar
That's
in
right.
San Diego. Yeah, and that, unit deployed, and so he deployed with them, and then so maybe about a year after he got off the drill field, then we went to Okinawa because, lucky us, we got orders while he was deployed, to Okinawa, so I had the joy of organizing, I'm sure as you know, all of that by my lonesome, so I
Yes,
share some of
that's
that
right.
wonderful experience.
Yes, because I remember we were in 29 Palms when you guys were at Miramar because I have pictures of the
Oh,
girls when we would come down.
yeah, yeah,
Yep,
one of
that's
my
right.
favorite pictures of all times of Ella. I she's, like, so my favorite. We have these just random pictures of the girls, but, like, I think we went to Old Navy, strangely enough, I think when you're military members, these little trips mean a whole lot, right?
Yes.
And when this is, like, your life, those little trips mean a lot, and it's so crazy that I remember these things, but quick story about 2 things really fast. We went to Old Navy, and I only remember this because there's a picture of my oldest and Ella, um, standing in the display at the beginning of the store, and they're, like, next to the dog. Do you remember that?
Yes. Oh, yes. I
Oh
can
my
see it clear
goodness.
as day. Yep.
And then I one of my all-time favorite, and maybe, if Ella doesn't get too embarrassed, we can share it someday for people on Instagram or something, just briefly maybe in a story, but is of her just she's, like, trying to get out of a car seat, but, like, got stuck, and it's just the most epic picture, ever. It's literally one of my favorite. But it's so funny,
Oh,
like, I see those pictures, they come up, like, in my reminders, and it just reminds me of, like, all those times we were actually able to, like, get together,
yes.
and I'm not gonna lie, like, I know for a long time Dustin was saying, "Oh, I think we're gonna get orders to Oki, we're gonna get orders to Oki," and I was like, "For the love of God, can someone I know come out here, please?"
I
Like
know. Well, that's what I was saying. Like, I feel like we followed you guys this whole time. So we were waiting on orders to Oki, and then it never happened. And
No.
we were shocked. We were shocked. But one thing that really stands out to me is I guess it was Dustin's, not his last deployment, the deployment before. And you guys might have been in Oki at this time. Um, oh my gosh, I was having such a hard time. And I remember reaching out to Candace, just asking, like, hey, what can I do to make things better? And I remember when we would come down to visit, the guys would always take the girls to make pizzas on a certain day because they
Mhm.
had like pizza day or
It was
whatever.
Tuesdays. Yeah,
Yep.
Tuesdays. Tuesday pizza night. They did a little kids thing down the pizza shop from our house we had in California, yeah.
Yep. And I remember her telling me that I needed to do something like that with Ella while Dustin was gone. And so every Friday, we went out to eat at Subway because that was Ella's choice because she doesn't like
Mhm.
pizza now. I don't know what her deal is. But anyway,
What
we're
is
working on
that?
that. I
Yeah,
don't know.
yeah.
We're working on it.
We're in the
But
same boat.
but she and I would go to Subway, and that was one of the pieces of advice that I will give anybody else that asks me because it was one of my saving graces because it was a day that I didn't have to decide what I was cooking for dinner. I knew I didn't have to
Yep,
do dishes and it was time for her and I to bond. And
yep,
I am forever grateful for that. And, when you think about asking somebody for advice, in my, I guess, opinion, you don't really think about asking someone who's maybe active duty because you assume that they don't go through the same things as you do. But with you being active duty and a spouse, you're probably the best person ever to go to for advice because you see it from both sides of the picture.
yeah, I get that a lot, right? People always ask me, and so just, going forward, I definitely just want to remind any listeners that, I can only speak from my experiences and what I've gone through. And so it's not going to mirror what everybody else is kind of experiencing or going through. But I can definitely touch on a lot of things, but I'm by no means an expert for sure. But yeah, I've been through my share of deployments, and I know plenty of people have been through them also. I think, I know that that was a hard deployment. I think it was that Ella's first one?
Yes.
Yeah,
And
and
we
that's
were in
always hard, right? And
Yep, we were in San
I
Diego. We didn't know anybody because you guys,
yeah,
of course, had left us.
yeah, yeah, I mean, and I luckily, when Rosie was first born, I mean, maybe that's a whole 'nother topic we can talk about fertility and kids at some point. I mean, God, I'm sure you and I could talk for hours about that, but, when Rosie was first born, Chris, my husband, was on the drill field, and so we had to have a routine. It was almost like he was deployed, right, all the time.
Yes, I
So even
remember that.
yeah, that was rough. And so I had to come up with some of those things. But you're right, like, deployments are hard, and that routine is important, and giving yourself a break is important, right? And not feeling bad about that, like, oh, we should save money, we should be home, we should be cooking all the time.
Yeah,
Like, yeah, that sounds great, but you need a break, right? Everybody needs that. So it sounds like a good idea. Like, I'm gonna, save all this money and things like that. But hey, that $10 or $15 you spend on a Friday night, is gonna be such a stress reliever, or Tuesday night, or whatever it is, right? So just to kind of, get you in your own kind of routine to break things up. And I actually remember that conversation
yeah.
um with you, because you were like, "That's such a good idea." And then, funny enough, I think, Chris came home from deployment, and he was like, "How come you never told me that to do that when you were gone and I had Rosie by myself?" I'm like, you have listened? Come on, So yeah, I mean, that stuff is
Right.
definitely,
Exactly. I
yeah,
mean,
yeah,
well, and that's something else that we can talk about is him having to be home while you're deployed with kids.
yeah. That's a whole nother adventure. I've not been
Yeah.
deployed. I've not been deployed with him home, alone with her for that specific type of event. However, and we'll probably talk a little bit about my career steps, I'm sure, as we move forward, but I did transition from being an enlisted member to an officer. And so I had to go through TBS, which was 4 months long, the basic school at Quantico, Virginia. And then I had to go to a follow on occupational specialty school, like everybody else, of course.
Right.
Um, and so I did another month on Camp Johnson here in North Carolina. And so I was gone from the mid to end of January to 4th of July. I got home right before the 4th of July. I think it was right before the 96. And so he did do that time in Okinawa with nobody, with our
Oh,
then, I think she was 3 at that time.
oh, what a great
So
age.
yeah, so sure, like, that's a whole different perspective, and that was by no means easy. Um, but yeah, I mean, there's that aspect too, right? Of just kind of looking at military spouses and family and stuff like that. And um, yeah, I think there's a lot there. Looking forward, I'm sure we're going to be able to do some stuff, real good stuff,
Absolutely.
I think.
I just think about dual military families, and I definitely think that they're not talked enough about, because I know from my personal experience, just as like me working full time and Dustin being active duty, how difficult it is. So then I think about dual military families, and like I said, it is so hard for me to wrap my head around it, because it's like, okay, well, we're in the middle of a pandemic, obviously, and schools get shut down. Like, how do you guys handle that type of a situation? Like, I obviously have the option to take it off and stay home with my kid, but what do you guys do in that situation? It's things like that I'm
Yeah.
like, oh my God, like, I think I have it bad. I can't even imagine.
Yeah. That was a kind of a rough transition, but and like many people determining whether someone's an essential worker or not. Oh, we have jobs in the logistics field, both of us, and his unit, the majority of his unit was deployed when everything kind of shut down. And I had, not my unit, but one of my subordinate units was shut down. And so, just to kind of put in perspective, so I'm one of one in my entire regiment, which is about 1,000 Marines. I'm the only one with my occupational specialty in the entire regiment. Uh, And essentially what I do is send people to places and all of their things, their equipment, their personal baggage, but also their like military equipment, the trucks and all that stuff, right? And then I bring all of that stuff home. And so when all of this started with the coronavirus and things started to lock down and really get restricted, we had a battalion that was in Norway. And Norway said, "We're done. You all need to go home immediately. Goodbye." So not only were we looking at, and I don't think we directly addressed this in the introduction, we just said I'm a mom, but I do have two children. I have a 7-year-old and a 2-year-old, both soon to be 3 and 8 in about a month. And
Yes.
so I have a school age child and then a child that is in full time daycare. So, that was a big concern for us, but we both were deemed essential personnel by our units, and
Oh
so
my
we didn't
gosh.
just get to go home. Yeah. So, school quickly became virtual, and Chris's office is in open storage, which means that they have classified material at the open. So you can only enter their building with a key card and a passcode, and you can't have any personal electronic devices. They can't have smartwatches, they can't have their phones, they can't have tablets, they can't have computers, and nothing that emits a signal. So when Rosie had to do school virtual learning, yeah, it either
Like,
occurred at my, yeah, I mean, it either occurred at my office desk or he came to pick her up or bring her home from his office. So, you know, that was difficult. Luckily, there are some good things that came out of that. I'm sure we can talk about, but um, we were able to get letters signed by the command deeming us essential personnel, and then because we're dual active duty, we're deemed essential personnel for operations. The on base child development centers or daycare uh, were prioritizing. And so we went to the top of the priority list to continue to receive on base child care because we were both deemed essential personnel and because we're dual active duty. So, this. Some of the things that being dual active duty kind of helps you with, you get it put at the top of some of those lists.
yes, that's so
um,
true. So true. And I
oh,
know Dustin, he was deemed essential personnel. Um,
mhm,
obviously because he's in logistics too. And
yeah,
like I said, we had a hard enough time because my office, I mean, I'm technically essential too. Like dental emergencies don't stop just
yeah,
because the coronavirus
yeah,
happened. So we kind of went through that same thing too as like, what the heck are we going to do? Like she would come to work with me. She would go to work with him. Like,
yeah. Yeah, Rosie would, that's my older daughter, 7, Rosalie, Rosie for short, or Roro if you're asking her younger sister. She's many names here. Um, I would clear off half of my desk, and she would sit facing me, and half my work desk would be her school desk, and she would hotspot off my phone Wi-Fi and do her schoolwork there, sitting at my office desk while I worked during the day because we were essential personnel and school wasn't open. And I'm from California. I don't think we talked about that either. My husband's from Texas, so we don't have family in North Carolina. His whole family is in Texas, and majority of mine is in California. My dad and my best friend live in Florida, but they're not North Carolina.
right. Yeah.
So yeah, and same for you guys, right? Your
Yep.
family's in Ohio. You're not Ohio,
Illinois.
right?
We're Illinois.
Illinois. Yeah,
Yeah.
Illinois.
Yep. But it's
So
the same thing for us. We don't have family out here
yeah,
either. Thankfully, I have a really good friend who's a teacher's assistant at the school that our kids go to. And so she was gracious enough to take Ella in during the pandemic because her daycare, they, they're, so where she went for after school, um, they're an actual preschool as well. So when the pandemic
mm,
happened, they didn't have the availability to take on these school-aged kids and do virtual work with them. So
yeah.
we had to figure something else out. And thankfully, my friend took her in and would do virtual work with her because her daughter is in the same class as Ella. But I mean, there were days I would just sit at work and just cry because I'm like, I don't know what we're going to do.
Oh yeah. I mean, my days were like They still kind of are, and honestly, going forward, like, I've just gotten back into school and now co-hosting with you, and I've just added a bunch of stuff to my plate for 2021.
Literally, when I
So
asked Candace to co-host, she was like, I don't know if I'm going to have enough time. And I was like, come on, an hour every other Sunday, please.
yeah, so I think
It was
I've,
like
like
it was like a week before she was like, okay, I'm going to do it.
yeah, I mean, I couldn't really pass up this opportunity, to be honest. I did a lot of thinking about it and a lot of conversating with people I work with here at home, friends and neighbors down the street are some good friends of ours, and I just really was debating, not because I didn't want to do it, not because I didn't think that it would be helpful, but because, my schedule is busy.
Yes. Yes,
And
it is.
yeah, and so I'm close to being done with my degree. I'm about 8 classes away from being done with my bachelor's, which has been a honestly ongoing, like, 11-year saga of my life. Um, but yeah, I mean, I wasn't fully sure, but I said, "You know what? I think there's a lot of stuff," and, I listened to quite a few of your podcast episodes. I started out, when you first started listening to a lot of, what was going on, and so, uh yeah, I went back and was just listening, and I was like, "You know what? I think there's some space here. There's some room to really get in there and answer some of those questions." Like, one of the episodes I listened to was or, I listened to quite a few, but the one of the things I remember reading, let me take that back. I remember reading was, you posted on Instagram about, the naval hospitals, right?
Oh,
Um,
yes. That's my
yeah, and then
favorite topic to talk about.
yeah, and then you posted, um, "Dustin and I are gonna need to have a conversation," uh you were talking about the COVID immunizations. That was, I
Oh,
think, the
yeah.
Merry COVID Christmas, just before the holiday, right? And, you were like, "He's never received this paper, and he's never had to wait 15 minutes." I'm like, "Oh, there's so many reasons for that, that he's not talking about, that he probably, just like most service members, just overlook," right? But when you're the service member, this is kinda gonna be the fun thing for me, and so when I was thinking back on those couple of things, and when you're the service member and the spouse and the mother, um, you see all the different reasons and different approaches to stuff. And so, uh, the reason that Dustin doesn't get one of those little tickets, right? That you get, like, when Rosie gets the flu shot, she gets a little ticket with her name and the lot number. Then we have to show it to the school, but he doesn't get that because it all goes right into his military medical record. So he
Right?
doesn't get that. But medical practices are evolving, even with military members, because the medical system sometimes lags a little, but even more so for the service member, because people just default to, like, oh, it's in your medical record, it's in your medical record. So they don't feel the need to provide that to the individual, because what's Dustin going to do with it? Turn around and give it to medical? Like, they already
Right?
know that. you
Right?
know? Yeah, I mean,
Otherwise, he's
it's
going to
just
crumple it up and throw it away. Like,
that's literally what he's going to do with it, right? He's going to crumple it up and throw it away.
yeah,
So,
because I don't think I ever saw that piece of paper.
no. And you won't. He doesn't know where it's at either.
No. Mm-mm. I'm sure he
But
doesn't.
yeah, I think we're going to be able to kind of broaden their perspective a little bit of some of the topics and really get into some things. Maybe, like I said, I'll be able to answer some questions that kind of linger out there about why things are the way they are. Like, we were chatting a little bit about why, Dustin had to leave so early for a flight, right?
Right?
Um, but I learn all of the technical reasons behind that, all of the kind of common sense reasons behind that, that maybe don't make a lot of sense to people, but in the military they make a lot of sense. So I can probably answer a lot of those things, um, that really people have questions about, or, like I said at the beginning, don't know they want to know, but once they hear it, they're like, "Oh, I get it now."
Right.
So
Yes,
yeah.
absolutely. And it's like I was telling Candace, like, Candace is able to break it down for civilians to understand, whereas, Dustin and I are very open. We have a lot of conversations. I want to know, what's going on at his job and stuff. But I don't know that he has the capability to like break it down into terms for me. And that's one of the things that I'm super excited about is that Candace does have that ability. Because I know there's been times that I'm like, we're all sitting together having a conversation and, you know, you guys are talking in your military lingo or whatever. And I just look at her and she was like, okay, this is what it is. And I'm like, oh, okay, now that makes sense. Whereas he just
Um,
gets frustrated and is like, I don't understand
yeah,
why you don't know, why you don't understand.
yeah. To be fair, and I think in the one of your other episodes, God, now I can't remember which one. I wrote it all down, but I was at work when I was listening, so now I don't, of course, have that notebook because why would I bring that with me? But yeah. So one of the things that you kind of said was like initially not knowing anything about what Dustin does, or and I just for you and anybody that listens, right? I just want people to know that's really commonplace, to be quite honest. I meet a lot of Marines, and their spouses, and they say, well, I don't know what my spouse does. But yeah, you're not alone. A lot
Yes.
of a lot of spouses just have no idea. Some don't want to, and some just don't, because they, like you, have a job or kids, or they're just preoccupied with other things, and understanding what their spouse does, uh, when they're not home and at work is just not a priority to them, because it likely doesn't apply to anything they're going to use it. They're never going to use it, right? So they just
Right.
are like, okay, I
Yeah.
don't I don't need to know. I don't need to know. And I work with I work with someone right now, and he says my spouse doesn't want to know, doesn't care. And I'm like, oh, well, how do you feel about that? And totally not an issue for them. That's what they want.
Right.
And I'm like, well, okay then.
Right. But I'm the opposite where I want to know, but it's hard to understand what he's telling me because he's
Yeah.
not giving it to me in my people's terms.
Yeah, yeah, right. Uh,
So, all right, we are at about our 30-minute mark. So, Candace and I
mhm.
could probably talk for hours and hours and hours, and we will over the course of 2021. So, once again, I am so excited to have you here with me. Oh my gosh. Also, a little intimidated because Candace knows a lot.
Well, I mean, you say that, but I always try to tell people to keep that in perspective also. I've been active duty for 17 years. You
Yes.
can't, you know, there's a lot that comes with just time, right? That I've learned. So, yes.
Yes, but I'm very excited for all of the knowledge that you have gained in those 17 plus years. So, Candace will be permanently on the podcast with me, and I hope that you guys are just as excited as we are. And thank you, Candace, again for joining me.
Absolutely.
And don't forget to subscribe to your favorite podcast listening platform.